Hi, I'm Adam Porter and this is my board gaming vlog, and we're looking at my top 100 tabletop games. So that's board games, card games, dice games. I'm not including any of my own games that I've designed, like Doodle Rush and Pikoko and Quazzle and Zooligans and Compromat. These are eliminated from the list, but I'm looking for games which really connect with me and which I have an emotional sort of reaction to. And actually, I think you'll find in this 10 that we're going to look at today, there are quite a few that are in there because of nostalgia more than anything else. So we're looking at the games from number 60 down to 51, so completing the first half of the list. And the first game at number 60 is the game Blitz Bowl from Games Workshop. Now, Blitz Bowl is a reworking of the old game Blood Bowl. And I really loved Blood Bowl as a child. I suppose I started playing Blood Bowl when I was about 12 years old. Played it a lot. Never really got involved with all the campaigns and all that sort of stuff, but I enjoyed painting the figures and playing one-off games here and there. I liked the spin-off game Dungeon Bowl as a kid and all that sort of thing. So I was quite excited a few years ago when Games Workshop re-released Blood Bowl in, I think it was 2016, something like that. There was this new edition of Blood Bowl, and I bought it and I painted up my miniatures and I played it. And actually, the game went on and on and on. It took like 3 hours to play a match. It was crazy. And it really wasn't the experience that I was looking for. I enjoyed it, but it was going to be really hard for me to get this to the table, and certainly to play all those campaign rules where your players are upgrading and you're getting new players and players are dying. That was going to mean playing multiple games with the same people over and over again, and I was never going to achieve that. So I was really pleased when Blitz Bowl came out shortly afterwards. And Blitz Bowl was an American exclusive, unfortunately. I believe it was also in Germany, but not in the UK. And it's a really, really quick version of Blood Bowl. Much smaller teams, cheaper package, don't have any sort of campaign or anything like that. Plays in about half an hour. I mean, and it's silly. It's got all the silly, crazy fun of Blood Bowl, but in a much smaller package. So this one really connected with me. I wish it was available in the UK. There's been a season 2, which essentially is the same game, just a slightly updated package that you can get, I believe, in America, but still nothing in the UK. Blitz Bowl, though, great game if you can get hold of it. I personally got mine shipped in from America. It didn't cost too much at the time from Barnes & Noble. I don't know whether that situation would be different now, but if you really, really love Blood Bowl, then I think you're doing yourself a favour by getting this, because you're going to find it much easier to get it to the table, and it has a lot of the same fun in it. Number 59 on the list is Fantasy Realms. Now, Fantasy Realms is a game by WizKids, and WizKids produced my game Throne. Last year, I think 2019, I think Throne came out early 2019, and I realised I hadn't actually got many WizKids games. They tend to be games that are full of sort of fantasy themes and those aren't necessarily the themes that automatically, although my statistics that I've shown you tend to tell you otherwise, but I'm not drawn to that sort of Dungeon and Dragon sort of style artwork particularly. But I thought, they've published my game. I wanted to have a look at a couple of their games, and one of the games I picked up was Fantasy Realms because I'd heard that it was really good. And I was quite put off by the cover of the game, but then when I played it, it was fantastic. Okay, the rule set was so simple. I mean, there's barely any rules to it, and essentially what you're trying to do is just put together the best possible hand of cards. So you're putting cards down, you're picking up other cards, and they all combo in so many different ways to create these scoring opportunities. I just found it absolutely fascinating. So much fun to play, putting together this hand of cards, and then at the end of the game, when that comes around, you just lay out your hand and say, this is how much I've scored based on the different cards and how they combine with each other. Really, really clever. I'm very, very impressed by the designer of this one. Number 58 on the list is the game Quarto. Now, if you've watched my other videos earlier in this top 100, you'll have seen the game Goblet, and this is a similar sort of game. Again, we've got nice wooden pieces, a really attractive thing that you could leave out on a tabletop and it would look like a little ornament you could just pick up and play from time to time. It's a 2-player abstract game where you're trying to create 4 in a row. In this game, when it's my turn to go, my opponent chooses which piece I get to place. Now, I can put it wherever I like, but they choose the piece that I have to play. And that was really intriguing to me. I found that fascinating. You've got to create 4 in a row. They could be 4 matching colours, or they could be 4 of the set of matching size or matching shape. You know, there's a variety of different categories that you can match in, but you want to get 4 in a row. Your opponent's trying to prevent you from doing that by giving you different pieces. Now, it's reminiscent. When I played this, it reminded me of my game Pikoko, which is a trick-taking game where when I play a card, it's chosen by my opponents rather than me getting to play it myself. I don't know that there are that many games that do that, but Quarto is a really, really good, simple example of that mechanism. Number 57 is the game San Juan. Now, San Juan is a card game re-implementation, really, of the game Puerto Rico, which was extremely popular in the early 2000s. So San Juan followed on with the same designer, Andreas Seyfarth, and I prefer it to Puerto Rico. I think it takes everything that's good from Puerto Rico and does away with all the sort of extra stuff. So in San Juan, you've got these multi-use cards. So each card can be played either as a building, which will give you some sort of ability, or you can discard cards and use them as money to pay for buildings, or you can tuck cards under production buildings and then they count as the resources. So if you've got something that's creating silver, for example, any tucked cards under it count as pieces of silver that you can then trade in order to score points, depending on varying sort of stock prices, I suppose, for how much silver is worth at that point in the game. So really clever use of multi-use cards. And it's got that follow mechanism, which we saw previously in the game Skylands, where if I take an action, everybody else gets to take that action as well immediately. I just get a better version of it. Okay, and so that's the way that the game sort of functions, in a similar way to the game Puerto Rico. It's one of the earliest games I got when I first got into, really got into these sort of designer games, or what are we calling these games now? Hobby games, I suppose, and out of my old mass market sort of approach that I would have followed in my 20s and as a teenager and as a kid. So San Juan was quite pivotal for me in getting into this hobby, really. So number 56 is Flickr Up, which is a cowboy western game, which comes in a big wooden box, and essentially it's full of wooden pieces, building blocks, really, so you can create a western on your tabletop. Great thing about the game is you're really doing what it says you're doing. You know, if I'm playing as a cowboy and I want to shoot another cowboy, then I literally get down to his eye level and I flick a bullet and I try and knock that cowboy over. And I've got cowboys and they're running into buildings and looting buildings, trying to free other cowboys who've been, hung up on a noose or whatever. You've got different weapons that allow you to shoot the discs in different ways. You've got horses and, you're hiding behind cactuses. It really, really creates this sort of idea of being in a Western. Essentially, it's just one big toy box. Absolutely love it. The expansions add a lot of new stuff to it. I believe there's a Dead of Winter zombie version of the game as well. I haven't played that one. I'm much more interested in the Western theme than the zombie theme. But yeah, I think it's great. It's just a lovely production and a wonderful thing to have, this big toy box of Western toys, really. And there's a decent little game in there. Loads of scenarios and stories that you can create, settings for your battles and your shootouts. Number 55 won't need much introduction. That's the game Carcassonne. So Carcassonne is a tile laying game. You're laying down tiles, building up the board as you play. That was the thing that blew my mind when I was introduced to Carcassonne. This really was the first of the sort of European style modern games that was introduced to me. I remember going into Rules of Play, the game shop in Cardiff, many years ago, speaking to the man who worked in there, doesn't work in there anymore, and saying to him, I want to get a board game for Christmas. What should I get? And him showing me Carcassonne and just thinking, well, this is like a jigsaw you put together. You're building the board as you go, but there's a game that you play. It's like a jigsaw that you can play competitively against somebody else. And that's bizarre to me now that tile laying seems such a new thing, such a new, exciting, alien concept. But coming from mass market games, I'd never even considered such a thing, that you might build the board as you play. But Carcassonne remains a fantastic game, whichever version of it you get. I like the game Carcassonne South Seas. I've enjoyed many of the different versions. I've enjoyed different expansions over the years. But I suppose I tend to just come back to base game Carcassonne with inns and cathedrals. I tend to have inns and cathedrals always in there, and the river. But I'd love to put more expansions in there, really. Yeah, I mean, it's just great, isn't it? It's a good introduction to the hobby. It's not complicated. The Farmers is a little tricky, but it's sort of just tricky enough that it's an introduction to the sort of mechanisms and little scoring twists that we get in these games. So, and you can play without it as well. So, yeah, Carcassonne, really accessible, lovely game. Number 54 is a game that I played a lot when I was a child, probably more a teenager. This was my dad's childhood favourite game, and I've still got his copy of it. It's called Dover Patrol. It's probably not a game that anyone's particularly familiar with. It's not in production now, but essentially this game plays like the game Stratego. It predates Stratego. This is from Gibson's Games, from Harry Gibson. He created it along with two other games, L'Attaque, which I think is Gibson's do still produce L'Attaque, and Aviation. So we had an army game, a navy game, and a plane game. And then Tri-Tactics, which includes all three as well. And I've got a copy of each of those games. I've managed to pick up in, sort of off eBay and things like this. They're really, really old. This game, I think we're talking from the early sort of 1900s that these games first started to come out. But I'm not. I do really like it's a two-player, face-to-face bluffing game. It's a game where you can set traps, and I think that's really nice. That's one thing I really enjoy in it, is that you can, you can bluff your opponent. They think they're going to be attacking something, but actually you've snuck something else in there, and so they're attacking something which they think is vulnerable. But then when you reveal what tile it is that they're actually attacking, what the playing piece is, then it could be something really quite brutal. And I like that. There's not many games that give me that sense of I've set a trap and my opponent has fallen for it. But Dover Patrol really gives me that in spades. I've never actually played Stratego, but I suspect it's probably a streamlined version of Dover Patrol, and it may even be more enjoyable. But Dover Patrol, of course, is something which I love just because it's something which reminds me of my dad. My dad's still around. I could play Dover Patrol with him. Well, I can't right now because of lockdown, but as soon as lockdown's over, if I wanted to, I could go and play a game of Dover Patrol with my dad. But it is special to me because it's a family game, something that's specific to my family. But added to that, quality game. Takes a while to play. That's the downside to it. It can go on a little bit. Particularly my dad's quite a slow player. He likes to think about his turns, so it can go on a little bit. But it's totally enjoyable and engaging while it lasts. Number 53 on the list is the game Tikal. This is from the what's called the Mask trilogy with Mexico and Cuzco. Tikal is a action point game. One of the first games that uses action points that you can spend to move your people onto the board, to move them around the board, to uncover temples. And you want to build up these temples, but you want to have the majority. So you want to have more of your pieces surrounding that temple than anybody else, so that when a scoring round comes about, then you're going to score lots of points for those temples and for the treasures that you've gained. It's from Wolfgang Kramer and Michael Kiesling, which is just a magical duo of designers. Anything they create just is fantastic. And I love the Super Meeple production. I had this entire trilogy in the original Rio Grande version, but I've replaced them all with Super Meeple versions because I just love the three-dimensional temples and all this stuff. The production quality is out of this world with Super Meeple. Could not be more impressed with them. Number 52 on this list is Sushi Go, which was the first game I ever came across from Phil Walker Harding. And Sushi Go is a very simple, take a card, pass your hand on. Take a card, pass your hand on. Now, I had played Seven Wonders before I played Sushi Go, and I understand that Seven Wonders was an inspiration for Sushi Go. I liked Seven Wonders, but it never connected with me hugely. I always found it overcomplicated. The iconography was too much, constantly having to look up and think, what does this card do? What does that do? And I'm sure if you play it a lot, then that all falls to the by the wayside. But I never got totally to grips with it. Whereas Sushi Go was so intuitive and easy, portable. It just feels right for that style of game. It doesn't come in a massive box. It comes in a tiny little box. I remember taking it off to a friend was getting married, and I remember sitting in the pub the night before he got married with all my other friends. Obviously the groom wasn't there, but all the rest of us were there, and we just played Sushi Go all evening while having a drink, and it was really, really fun. These weren't gamers, you know, it's such a casual game, and then all of them wanted to go out and buy their own copy of Sushi Go, so it really connected with us. Sushi Go Party, of course, exists. These are from the Game Right editions of the game. Sushi Go Party has far more different types of cards that score in different ways. Personally, I don't tend to opt for Sushi Go Party because Sushi Go, what I enjoy is the fact that I know exactly how to play it. I enjoy the familiarity, I enjoy how portable it is, and actually I like the German version from Zock Verlag more than I like the Game Right version in terms of the artwork. I've also got the original version that Phil Walker Harding self-published. Yeah, I would tend to lean towards that Zock Verlag German version, although I know a lot of people find the artwork ugly. I just find it amusing. Yeah, Sushi Go, fantastic. It's a great introduction to games. This is a great one for children, families, anybody. Anybody can play Sushi Go and have a good time with it. Number 51 is Talisman. So Talisman is another one of those nostalgia things. I played Talisman yesterday with my wife. It feels like a nice Christmassy sort of game to play just because you don't have to think playing Talisman. You lay it all out and you just play it and you see what happens, and you've got these ridiculous stories going on. So, you know, yesterday I was a minstrel, that was my role. So I was this travelling musician and I was able to charm animals. And so I met an ape, but I normally have to fight the ape, but because I was the minstrel, I don't have to fight the ape, I can charm the ape, and then the ape becomes my follower, and he wanders around with me, and we go off and we fight dragons, this minstrel and this ape. Meanwhile, my wife is a dwarf, and it's just fluctuating between being a good dwarf and an evil dwarf. It's got a unicorn that it's following around with it. You know, it's total nonsense. You're just rolling dice. Your main decision is, do I move left or right? Rolling dice in order to move can get frustrating if you're trying to get somewhere and you can't get there because you can't roll the right numbers. But I just love the flavour of it all, the different cards and the different events that can happen. Just it's utter nonsense, the whole thing. But I played this a lot when I was a kid. When I was about 12, Talisman was about the best board game out there, really, from Games Workshop. Really wish I'd kept that original edition and the expansions that I had, but I sold that many years ago. When eBay was first a big craze, you could make a bit of money selling off these old board games. I wish I'd hung on to it. But now I've got the Fantasy Flight version, which is lavishly illustrated, big box. This is by all accounts, this is not a strategy game, okay? This is not a game that I would encourage you to go into if you enjoy working out your turns and playing well. It's also not a game that I would suggest that you play with somebody unless you really like them, okay? If you're just turning up to a game night and somebody offers you a game of Talisman and they're a bunch of strangers, don't play it, okay? Because you've got to like the other people. If you're playing, that's the only way to enjoy the game, is to have fun with the stories that are being told. And you can't get any enjoyment from the mechanisms of the game, the strategy. No, it's got to be played with somebody that you really get on with, where you're happy to sit around for a couple of hours and make up some good stories. Right, so what's that done to our leaderboards? Well, when we were looking at numbers 61 to 100, the publishers in the lead were Rio Grande, and then Zock Verlag were slightly behind, and then Matago, and then a bunch of others. So let's update that, looking at 51 to 100. Zock Verlag has now matched Rio Grande with 5, and then we've got Matago and Hans im Glück taking up the rear with 3 games apiece in the bottom 50 of my top 100. Looking at designers, so previously we had Reiner Knizia, Phil Walker Harding, Bruno Cathala and Andreas Seyfarth, all on 2 games apiece in the 40 games that we talked about. Now with 50 games, Phil Walker Harding and Andreas Seyfarth are ahead, with Reiner Knizia, Bruno Cathala, Klaus-Jürgen Reder, which is the designer of Carcassonne and Downfall of Pompeii, and then Kramer and Kiesling, that we've talked about a fair amount, coming up behind. In with regards to themes, so in the 40 games we talked about, anthropomorphic animals were ahead, then the ancient world, then fantasy. But now fantasy is pushed ahead. So fantasy is now way out in front. That's because of games like Talisman and Blitz Bowl and these sort of things. But ancient world and anthropomorphic animals coming in second place. We've got historic cities down there and exploration coming onto the list. This is the first time they've arrived on our charts. Next up then, so game styles. So when we were talking about those first 40, area majority, network building, and games played under time pressure, we're out ahead. But now area majority and tile laying are pushing ahead. Tile laying, area majority, with network building and time pressure behind, and stock holding and dice games behind that. So there we are. There's the top 50, or the bottom 50 of my top 100 games of all time. We're going to be moving into the top half, the top 50 games of all time in the next video. So we'll be looking at games number 50 to 41.